It was a simple Sunday dinner, the kind we used to have when the house was full of laughter and clattering dishes. I had roasted the chicken the way they liked, made sure the rice was fluffy, even folded the napkins into little triangles, because I knew how much that used to make them smile when they were young. I placed everything just right, down to the salt shaker, beside the mashed potatoes, even though I hadn't used salt in years. They came in with chatter, their voices loud, full of stories I was no longer a part of. I stood at the head of the table waiting for someone to notice anything really. My hands trembled slightly as I passed the plates. Not from age, though they might think so. Not from weakness. It was the weight of holding in everything I wanted to say every time I bit my tongue so they could eat in peace. They didn't see. Not one of them looked at me long enough. I refilled their glasses while they laughed about work things and vacations and friends I didn't know. My hands shook again when I tried to pour the tea and the spoon clinked against the side of the cup louder than it should have. I caught my breath, embarrassed, and looked around. But no one flinched. No one asked if I was all right. I wondered if I could spill the whole pot break, the porcelain cry right there, and they'd still keep talking untouched. Sometimes I think I've become part of the furniture, expected, reliable, silent. I sat down last after everyone had already started eating. That's how it's always been. They used to call it kindness. I just wanted them to eat first. But that night I felt it differently. It felt like absence. Like they wouldn't have noticed if I didn't sit down at all. Like I was feeding them from a different room entirely. I watched them eat. I listened. I nodded when they talked. I made the appropriate little sounds. Oh really? All, while keeping the rhythm. I didn't say much, just smiled when they mentioned things I didn't understand, or memories I didn't share. One of them talked about a new job opportunity, and the other chimed in about a coworker's wedding. They didn't ask me anything. Didn't ask what I'd done that week or how my doctor visit went or whether I still had trouble sleeping. Maybe they assumed they already knew me or that there was nothing new to know. I had planned to tell them something that night, just something small, something about how tired I've been feeling lately, about how I'd stood in front of the sink yesterday and forgotten why, about how I stared at my reflection in the mirror this morning and barely recognized the woman looking back. But I didn't say it. I smiled instead. I passed the salad. I laughed at a joke I didn't hear all the way. Because that's what I do. That's who I've always been. The one who holds it in, holds it together, holds everyone up, and never lets them see the cracks, even when my hands tremble, even when my voice wants to break, even when I feel like a ghost sitting at a table full of people I gave my life to. I thought they'd notice. I thought someone would reach across the table, take my hand, and say, "Are you okay, Mom?" Or even just, "You seem quiet tonight." But all I got was a nod when I offered more chicken. I looked down at my plate, and the food blurred a little. Not from tears, no, not yet. Just from the way my eyes refused to focus. I blinked, sat up straighter, took a breath, and picked up my fork like nothing was wrong. Because I knew even then that if I cried, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And worse, they might not even look up. That's what I told myself every time I swallowed back the lump in my throat. I became an expert in disguises, smoothing wrinkles, not just from clothes, but from moments. I folded unease like laundry, tucked my disappointment into drawers, and dusted sorrow off the surfaces of our time together. When they walked through the door, I made sure the house smelled like cinnamon or fresh laundry. I wore warm colors even when I didn't feel warm. I fixed my hair even if no one would comment on it. I put lipstick on lips that hadn't spoken their truth in years. Because they were busy. Because they were tired. Because they had their own lives. I told myself those things like prayers over and over so I wouldn't resent them. I remember once it was barely even winter, yet I woke up aching, the kind of ache that seeps into the bones, the kind that doesn't go away with aspirin or warm baths. I could hardly lift my arms, and the light hurt my eyes. I leaned against the sink and took a moment longer brushing my teeth, just to steady myself. But that day was special. They were all coming over for lunch, and I didn't want them to see me like that, fragile, off balance, not the mother they remembered, not the woman who used to wipe their noses with one hand while stirring soup with the other. So I pressed through it, made the soup anyway, set the table with the good placemats. And when they arrived, I opened the door with a smile so wide it felt like a mask pulled too tight across my face. My voice was a little strained, but I made it light. I didn't want to worry them. Because if I worried them, I feared they'd come less often. And that was worse than anything. We ate together, and I kept up the small talk. My hands ached so badly I could barely lift the bowls, but I passed them with grace. My head throbbed, but I laughed at their stories. They were good stories, stories I wasn't in, but still good. They talked about colleagues' weekend plans, news from people I'd never met. I smiled through all of it, nodding, tilting my head, saying just enough to make them believe I was still me. No one asked how I was feeling. Maybe they thought I'd tell them if something was wrong. Maybe they forgot to ask, or maybe they didn't want to know. And I let them forget. After they left, I sat in the same chair for almost an hour, not moving, just listening to the silence bloom around me, the way it does when the front door closes and the house returns to stillness. I looked at the dirty dishes in the sink, the empty chairs, the crumbs on the floor. It all felt heavier than usual. I stood up slowly and started cleaning because that's what I do. I clean up after love like it's a party that always ends too early. There were moments when I wanted to say something, to call one of them up later and tell the truth that I wasn't okay, that I'd been scared that morning when I couldn't lift my arms without pain, that I'd stared at my reflection and not recognized my own eyes, that my heart felt so tired it could barely beat in rhythm with the world around me. But I didn't. Because what if they didn't know how to respond? What if they said, "I'm sorry to hear that," and changed the subject, or worse? What if they offered pity instead of love? So I smiled, because it's safer. Smiles are shields. Smiles make people comfortable. Smiles keep the world spinning the way they want it to. And when I smiled, they didn't have to pause. They didn't have to look too closely. They could keep talking about weekend trips and office jokes, and I could stay right where they wanted me, the steady one, the strong one, the woman who never needed anything. But inside a quiet ache was growing. Not the ache in my arms or my back, but something deeper. An ache that came from not being truly seen, from sitting across the table from people you love more than your own life, and realizing they haven't really looked into your eyes in years. I don't mean glancing, I mean looking. That deep human gaze, the kind that asks nothing but gives everything, the kind that sees behind the smile and says, "Talk to me." I missed that kind of looking, missed it so much it hurt. But I smiled anyway, for them, always for them. Because somehow in all those years of loving them, I learned to silence myself, thinking that was the same thing as being strong. It used to be my favorite thing, planning birthdays, anniversaries, even the little in-between milestones. I remember once staying up all night baking a butterfly cake for my daughter's 8th birthday, because she had a dream about one the week before. I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured it out. I cut the pieces just right, arranged the wings, dyed the icing with food coloring I'd never used before. The next morning when she saw it, she screamed and hugged me so hard it knocked the piping bag out of my hand. That moment stayed with me, her eyes wide with wonder, her little voice shouting, "You did this for me." Yes, I did it for her, for all of them. Back then they knew. They saw the things I did. But these days I still bake the cakes. I still wrap the gifts with shaking fingers. I still iron the tablecloths and light the candles and print out little name tags for the table as if it matters, as if someone might notice and say thank you. I make everything beautiful, not because they ask, but because I believe every celebration should feel like love you can touch. And then I stand off to the side, watch them from the hallway sometimes, or linger by the kitchen sink wiping invisible spills while they take selfies in front of the banner I strung up. They pass the cake around, and someone usually says Grandma made it, but it's always an afterthought tossed out while chewing. No one asks me to sit in the center. No one says, "Come join us in this picture." I used to be the center. Now I'm the backdrop. I don't think they do it intentionally. I don't think they're cruel. I think they've grown so used to me being the one who supports from behind the scenes, they forgot I ever belonged in the front. I used to hold the camera. Now I'm not even in the frame. There was a birthday last spring, my grandson's. I stayed up late baking cupcakes with blue frosting and little silver stars on top. I knew he liked space. I even found a cake topper shaped like a rocket. I was proud of that one, silly proud. The kind of proud you feel when you know you've done something quietly perfect for someone who won't even realize how much it cost you. They walked in, admired. The setup took pictures of the cupcakes, even posted them online. I saw the phone screens light up as they showed each other. "Look at these," someone said. "These are amazing." No one looked at me. They looked at the cupcakes, the decorations, the paper planets I hung from the ceiling, but not at the woman who stayed up past midnight on aching feet to make it happen. I kept waiting for someone to notice, to say something more than "so cute," or "you really went all out." I waited for someone to see me in all of it, the effort, the intention, the love baked into every star-shaped sprinkle. It didn't come. So I smiled. I clapped when they sang "Happy Birthday." I handed out plates, picked up wrappers from the floor, collected dirty napkins and tucked them into my apron like old habits. I even laughed with them when the candle blew out too soon, pretending like my eyes weren't stinging. Later that night after they left, I stood in the doorway of the living room and looked at the balloons sagging under the ceiling, the crumbs on the table, the half-eaten cupcakes. I whispered "Happy Birthday" one more time to no one. I don't know when exactly it happened, when I went from being celebrated to being the one who makes celebrations possible. But I felt it, slowly like a curtain falling, and it hurt more than I admitted. It wasn't about needing attention. I've never cared much for that. But there's something about being forgotten in the middle of your own love. Something about being surrounded by joy that you created only to be left alone in its echo. I used to be the one they clung to when the candles blew out. Now I'm the one who cleans up the wax. It started with a heaviness in my chest. Not the emotional kind, though I carried that too, but a tightness that made breathing just a little harder, made climbing the stairs feel like scaling a mountain. I chalked it up to age, the weather, maybe sleeping in the wrong position. I told myself it was nothing, because that's what I'd learned to do. Downplay, endure, minimize, push it deep enough that it wouldn't get in anyone else's way. The pain didn't go away. It came and went in waves, subtle but persistent. There were moments I had to stop halfway through folding laundry just to catch my breath. I remember standing at the sink, hands in dishwater, when my heart fluttered strangely, not like excitement, not like joy, but a warning. My body was whispering something, but no one else heard it. I could have told them. I could have picked up the phone, said, "Can you come over? I'm scared." But I didn't. I imagined the awkward silence on the other end, the hesitation, the hurried voice saying, "Oh no, I've got meetings today," or "Let me see if I can rearrange some things." I imagined being told I was probably just anxious or tired, or that I should get more rest. So I kept quiet. Instead, I scheduled the doctor's appointment on my own, took the bus because my license had expired, and I didn't want to trouble anyone for a ride. I sat in the waiting room between strangers reading magazines, hands folded in my lap like a schoolgirl, trying not to think about what might be wrong. I hoped it was nothing. I hoped it wasn't the kind of thing that would require hospitalization or a long recovery. Not because I feared pain, but because I feared being alone through it. When the doctor suggested a scan just to be safe, I nodded, asked no questions, took the paper, booked the appointment, and left. On the way home, I stopped for groceries like it was a regular day, carried a heavy bag home, even though my arms ached, cooked dinner for one, didn't eat much of it. That night, I sat at the table and looked at my phone, scrolled through photos, birthdays, vacations, Sunday brunches. There I was in all of them, somewhere on the edges, smiling, holding a tray, fixing a collar, clearing a plate. Not once had I been held in those frames. I wanted to send a message, something short. Hey, just a little health thing, nothing major, but I couldn't finish typing. I erased it, rewrote it, then put the phone face down. Because what I needed wasn't advice or scheduling help or reminders to drink water. What I needed was for someone to see me, to know without being told that something wasn't right, to hear it in my voice before I spoke, to show up without being asked. But that kind of knowing, the deep kind, the kind that comes from love, that pays attention, it had faded. Or maybe I had faded into convenience, into background, into the woman who could always handle things. I used to think silence was strength. Now I wonder if it's just loneliness in disguise. The scan came back clear. It was nothing urgent, they said. Probably stress, maybe fatigue. But those results didn't ease the ache in my chest. Because the worst part wasn't thinking something might be wrong. It was realizing that no one knew I was afraid. I held it all inside, every flutter, every throb, every dizzy spell, because I didn't want to be a burden. But in protecting them from my pain, I abandoned myself. I wonder if they would have even known what to say, if I had told them, if I had looked them in the eye and said, "I need you." Would they have reached for me? Or would they have looked away, like they always do when I tremble? It was late afternoon, that soft golden hour when the sun drapes everything in forgiveness. I had gone out to clip the rosemary. It had overgrown a little, and I liked the way the scent lingered on my fingers. The soil was damp from the morning's rain, and I should have worn my sturdier shoes, but I didn't think I'd be out long. I leaned over to reach a sprig near the edge of the raised bed, and something shifted in my knee, a tiny snap like a twig, and before I could catch myself, the ground came up fast and swallowed me. The breath left my body with a quiet grunt, not a scream, just a sound that felt like apology. I lay there for a few seconds, blinking up at the sky, watching a bird cross through a cloud. It was oddly peaceful. The air smelled of basil and wet earth. My heart beat fast, but I didn't panic. Not right away. I tried to sit up, my leg refused. Pain shot up from my hip like a flare. I gritted my teeth, tried again. No use. My elbow was scraped raw from the fall, and there was soil in my sleeve. I was alone. The house was quiet. No one was due to visit for days. I had turned my phone to silent earlier that morning because I didn't want it buzzing while I napped. It was inside on the kitchen table, far from reach. I called out once, not loudly, just a test. Nothing. So I waited. I shifted my weight, managed to pull myself to a sitting position. My breathing was shallow, cautious. I rested my hand on the rosemary bush beside me, and it brushed my skin gently, like a small act of comfort. I sat in the dirt, the kind of sitting that feels permanent, and I wondered if I didn't come in for dinner, how long would it take before someone noticed? I stayed like that for almost an hour. The sun dipped lower, brushing the fence with gold. My body ached, but not just from the fall. It was the ache of realizing that I could vanish slowly, gently, like steam, and no one would know until the air turned cold. Eventually, I pulled myself up, one hand gripping the edge of the raised bed, the other holding onto the gardening stool. It took everything I had. My breath came ragged, my heart pounded, but I made it. I limped inside, washed my hands, wiped the blood from my elbow, made a cup of tea. No one called. No one knew. I could have died out there. It sounds dramatic, doesn't it? But it was true. If I'd hit my head, if my leg had snapped, if the pain had swallowed me whole, they wouldn't have known until maybe days later, when the mailbox filled up, when the neighbor noticed the light never turned off. I stood by the window, tea in hand, watching the garden darken. The rosemary swayed gently, the same one I had reached for, and I thought how strange to live your life tending things, nurturing them, protecting them, and still end up alone in the dirt without a single pair of eyes looking for you. I didn't tell anyone about the fall. Why would I? It would just make them worry, or worse, it would make them guilty. And guilt is such a useless thing when it comes too late. So I smiled the next time we spoke. I asked them how they were doing. I listened, nodded, offered warmth. And they never knew that just days earlier, I had sat in the garden like a forgotten statue bleeding quietly into the soil. There's a kind of silence that comes after moments like that. A silence not just around you, but inside you. It's the silence of understanding, not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that settles like dust in an empty room. That was the day I realized something I've never said aloud. It's not just that they don't check in. It's that they don't see me enough to know when they should. It's strange the way love teaches you to stay quiet. Or maybe it's not love. Maybe it's the fear of what might happen if you stop. I don't remember when it began, this ritual of sweeping behind them, wiping away what they left behind. It started with toys, crumpled socks, under the couch, spilled milk on the kitchen tiles. Back then, it felt like devotion, a mother's duty. I took pride in making a home that held them gently. But years passed and the messes changed. The footprints got heavier. The silences grew longer. The plates in the sink stayed longer than they should have. The visits became shorter, but the trail they left behind remained: coffee rings on the table, jackets draped over chairs, shoes kicked off in the hallway like they never really left their childhood behind. They would come and go like wind, never staying long enough to feel the dust settle. And when the door closed behind them, I'd return to the silence, to the rooms where echoes live. I'd walk from one corner to the next, collecting things: forgotten chargers, used tissues, half-eaten snacks, like relics from a life that used to be mine. I never scolded, never reminded, never said, "Can't you clean up after yourselves?" I didn't want to be that kind of mother, the nagging one, the bitter one. I didn't want to push them away with something as trivial as crumbs on the counter or muddy footprints on my kitchen floor. So I stayed quiet, scrubbed, folded, picked up the wrappers and threw them away like secrets. They didn't notice, or if they did, they assumed I didn't mind. And maybe I didn't at first, but over time, the weight of their disregard built up in layers, like grease on a stovetop that no one cleans because it's always someone else's job. I started to wonder if they saw me at all, not just as the woman who opens the door and hugs them hello, but the woman who keeps the whole world from unraveling, silently, endlessly. One afternoon, after they left, I found a wet towel balled up on the bathroom floor. It had soaked into the tile, left a damp print, shaped like absence. I stood there for a long time just looking at it. It wasn't the towel itself, it was what it represented. The assumption, the carelessness, the thought that someone else would deal with it. I would deal with it, always. I picked it up. Of course I did. But my hands felt different this time, older, heavier, like each movement was part of a ritual I no longer believed in. And then I did something small, almost silly. I left a sock where it was, just one, in the hallway, bright red. I passed by it every day for a week. Part of me waited to see if they'd ask about it, if they'd say, "Oh, I must have left that, I'm sorry." But they never did. No one noticed. No one remembered. I threw it out on the 7th day. I wonder sometimes what would happen if I stopped. If I stopped wiping the tables, stopped taking their dishes to the sink, stopped folding their clothes when they visited, and left their laundry in the dryer, would they see the crumbs piling up? Would they see me beneath the tasks? Or would they just leave like always and come back next time, expecting everything to be clean? Love isn't about doing. I used to think it was. I used to believe that the more I did, the more I mattered. But now I see love, without reciprocity, is just labor. Invisible, tireless labor. And when no one sees it, no one sees you. I don't want a medal. I don't want a thank you speech. But I want them to look at me and realize that the clean house they walk into didn't appear by magic. That the folded towels, the warm meals, the freshly made beds, they came from my hands, and those hands are tired now. Not from the work, but from being unseen. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't cry, didn't beg. It was just a quiet moment. A small crack in the armor I'd worn for so long. I had spent the morning trying to open a jar of pickles. That's all it was. A stubborn lid too tight for my aging wrists. I tried everything, the towel trick, the rubber grip, running it under hot water. I even tapped it against the counter like I used to see my husband do. Nothing worked. And it wasn't about the jar. It never is. It was about the moment standing in the kitchen alone, holding something that wouldn't budge, something so simple that suddenly felt like proof. Proof that I wasn't strong anymore, that I wasn't who I used to be. So I called my son. I stared at the phone for a while before pressing the button. I rehearsed what I'd say, something light, something casual. "Hey, when you're free, can you stop by and help me open this jar? That's all. A 2-minute favor." He picked up after a few rings. I told him about the jar. I tried to make it sound like a joke. He laughed. "Mom, you still eating those things? You know they're full of salt." I smiled into the phone. "I just wanted one. I can't get the lid off." There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. Then he said, "I'll try to swing by this weekend." This was Tuesday. I said, "It's okay, don't worry about it." He didn't hear the shift in my voice. I hung up and stood there holding the jar. My hands trembled a little, not from the effort this time, but from something else, something colder, a feeling I didn't want to name. I sat down at the table, set the jar in front of me, and stared at it. It looked ordinary, harmless, but it felt like a symbol, a clear glass tomb of all the times I never asked for help, and the one time I did, I was told to wait. That weekend came and went. He didn't come. He texted Sunday night something about errands and being exhausted. I didn't reply. The jar was still there on the table, unopened. I finally threw it away. It wasn't about the pickles. It never was. It was about how heavy it felt to need someone just once and be left holding the silence. After that, I stopped asking. Even when the light bulb went out in the hallway and I had to climb a chair with shaking knees, even when the back gate broke and I tied it shut with old rope, even when I fell asleep in the armchair because I was too tired to get to bed and wished someone would cover me with a blanket like I used to do for them. I never asked again, because the answer, or the lack of one, hurt more than the struggle itself. I wonder if they think I'm still strong. Maybe they do. Maybe they believe I prefer to be left alone, that I'm capable, independent, all those shiny words we use to make aging sound brave. But strength, real strength, doesn't mean never needing help. It means trusting someone enough to ask and feeling safe enough to believe they'll show up. I gave them that safety all their lives. I was the one they called from college when they were sick, the one who drove through rainstorms with soup and clean laundry, the one who never said no even when I had nothing left to give. And yet when I stood in my own kitchen asking for a moment of care, the answer was, later. Later never came. That jar taught me something I didn't want to learn. I am on my own now, whether I like it or not. But I keep the phone charged, just in case one day someone calls me just to ask if I need anything, just to say I was thinking about you. So far it hasn't rung for that. It always came after I told a story about raising them on little sleep, about fixing the roof leak by myself, about how I managed the bills after their father passed. They'd look at me with a smile, sometimes even admiration, and say, "You're so strong, Mom," or "You've always been the strong one." And I'd nod, because that's what I was supposed to do. But inside, the word curled in my chest like something with teeth. Strong. It sounded beautiful on the surface. Who wouldn't want to be strong? Strong meant capable, resilient, a woman who could handle anything. And for a long time, I believed that's what I was. Maybe I even needed to believe it, because the alternative was being vulnerable. And when you're a mother, vulnerability can feel like failure. But here's what they didn't understand. Being called strong often means being denied softness. Because when you're the strong one, no one thinks to check on you. No one thinks you cry. No one thinks you fall asleep wondering if you matter to anyone who hasn't needed something from you. When I broke down one evening just once on the phone with my daughter, I told her I felt tired in a way that rest couldn't fix. I didn't use big, heavy words like depressed or hopeless. I just said, "I feel tired, honey, really tired lately." There was a silence, and then she said, "But you're strong, Mom. You always bounce back." And that was the end of the conversation. I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. I didn't want to bounce back. I wanted to be held. Strength had become a wall, one I'd built brick by brick every time I swallowed pain so they could thrive. Every time I stayed silent when I felt small. Every time I put their needs first and left my own for later until later disappeared altogether. They see me now as a pillar sturdy, rooted, unshakable. But pillars don't bend. They don't ask for comfort. They don't cry. I remember once years ago, sitting in the doctor's office for a routine checkup. He asked me about stress, about sleep, about how I was doing emotionally. I said I was fine. He smiled, wrote something down, and said, "You look like someone who's been through a lot, but you're strong." I nodded again like it was a badge, but I wanted to scream, because no one ever says, "You must be lonely." No one ever says, "You must be tired of being strong." I don't want a medal. I want someone to sit beside me without needing me to be anything. To sit quietly, to look at my face without expecting the usual smile, to say, "You don't have to carry it all alone." I wonder what would happen if I stopped being strong, if I let the weight slip and let it be seen, if I cried without apologizing, if I said I don't want to be brave today. Would they rush in? Or would they retreat, not knowing how to face the softness beneath the steel? They think they know. Because the truth is, strength became my disguise, my mask. And somewhere under all that effort, the woman I used to be, the one who laughed without planning it, who cried without shame she got buried beneath other people's needs. They called me strong, yes, but they forgot that even the strong need arms around them sometimes. Even the strong need to fall apart. And what aches the most isn't the strength I gave. It's how it made them forget I was ever human. They'd call when things were heavy voices, shaking just enough to let me know it was serious. I always answered on the first ring. It didn't matter if I was in the middle of folding laundry, stirring soup, or lying in bed after a long day. I'd pick up steady and warm, ready to absorb whatever sorrow they carried. That was my role, the keeper of their burdens, the soft place they could land. I became fluent in their fears, work stress, broken relationships, sleepless nights. I memorized their patterns, who cried when they were angry, who went quiet when they were scared. I listened with my whole self. I offered what wisdom I could, even when my own heart was fragile. Once my daughter called after midnight. Her voice cracked before she said hello. She was heartbroken over someone who had walked away, someone who promised forever and meant something far less. I sat on the edge of my bed, in the dark, phone pressed to my ear, whispering the same comfort I gave her when she was little and scraped her knees. "You're not alone," I told her. "You're never alone." And I meant it. But when the call ended, I sat there staring at the wall, empty and aching. I'd spent an hour pouring out light, and now there was none left for myself. My own tears stayed tucked behind my eyes, because if I cried, who would listen? Who would answer my call? I had no one I could say those words to, "I'm not okay." Not because there weren't people in my life, but because they had forgotten how to ask me the questions I once asked them. How are you really? Are you sleeping? What's been sitting heavy on your chest? No one asked. So I stopped expecting it, and I learned how to hold conversations that were all about them. I became a mirror, reflecting, absorbing, gently guiding. They said I was a good listener, that I always knew what to say, that I had a gift. But listening when it's never returned becomes a kind of hollow. They never knew the things I kept inside, how sometimes I'd open the closet and forget what I was looking for, or how certain songs made my chest ache with memories too sharp to carry. They didn't know that some nights I held my pillow like an anchor, afraid of how easily I was drifting. I remember one Thanksgiving, everyone gathered around the table, laughter bouncing off the walls. Someone brought up old stories, childhood chaos, my stubborn rules, the time I drove through a storm to get them to a recital. They laughed, and I smiled with them. But inside I wanted to say something simple. I'm lonely. I miss you. I miss being needed for more than just remembering where things are stored. But I didn't say it. I passed the gravy instead. They kept talking. I kept listening. And that's how it always went. I was the ear, the shoulder, the steady hand. And in return they gave me silence. Not cruel silence. Just the kind that grows when people forget you are more than a container for their pain. When they forget that the listener too has a voice, one that aches to be heard. I started writing things down in a little notebook by my bed, not grand thoughts, just fragments. Today I felt invisible. My knees hurt all day. I wish someone would ask how I'm doing. I never showed it to anyone. Because the truth is, I don't think they'd know what to do with my sadness. They know me as strong, as calm, as dependable. They know the shape of my love, not the depth of my need. And maybe that's my fault. Maybe I trained them too well. But even so, part of me still hopes that one day someone will sit across from me, look me in the eye, and say, "You've been listening for so long. I want to hear you now." It didn't happen all at once. Disappearances like mine take time. They begin quietly, with missed thank yous and unreturned calls, with the way they start talking over you instead of to you. At first I thought I was imagining it, just me being sensitive. So I brushed it off, told myself they were tired, distracted, busy, building their own lives. But over the years it added up like dust settling in corners no one cleans anymore. I gave them everything: my youth, my sleep, my body, my time. I gave them my favorite sweater when they were cold, gave up my plate when they were still hungry, gave up my dreams so they could chase theirs without guilt dragging behind. I gave them my quiet mornings, my late nights, my aching back, gave them the last bite, the biggest share, the warmest blanket. I even gave them my last name and watched them change it when they married, like I was a season they'd outgrown. And the more I gave, the less I seemed to exist. I became the one who just handles things, the one who's always there, the one who'll understand when plans change, who won't get upset when no one shows up, who won't say anything when her birthday is forgotten again. I'm not the emergency contact anymore. I'm not the first call with good news. I'm not even in the group chat they use to share pictures. I'm just here, holding the history of a family that no longer looks back. I noticed it one evening when I walked into the living room and heard them talking, all three of them, my children, laughing about a vacation they took last spring, one I hadn't known about, one I hadn't been invited to. I stood in the doorway unseen for a few seconds too long. They didn't hush their voices, didn't turn to include me. I said something casual, something light. Sounds like it was fun. They nodded, smiled, but no one said, "We missed you." No one said you should have come. It was like hearing about a world I used to belong to. I went back into the kitchen and picked up the same dish towel I'd been using all week, wiped down a counter that was already clean. Not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed a reason to be useful, to stay standing. You begin to fade when your love is no longer mirrored back. I didn't want repayment. I didn't want grand gestures. I just wanted to be remembered, not out of duty, but out of love. Not because they needed something, but because they wanted me near. There was a time they couldn't fall asleep without me sitting on the edge of the bed, humming softly, my hand on their forehead. I was their world, their anchor, the one who made monsters disappear with a whisper. Now I could vanish from a room from their lives, and the only thing they'd miss might be the meals or the clean towels or the way the lights turn on automatically when they come over. And that's the part that stings the most. Not the aging, not the solitude, but the quiet realization that I've become easier to ignore the more I loved them. They still say I love you, of course, but it's lighter now. Said at the end of phone calls like punctuation, not like it used to be. Fierce, uncontained, shouted from the back seat when I dropped them off at school. Now it's a whisper through static. And maybe I whisper it back too quietly. Maybe I've shrunk so gently into the background that they don't even know I'm gone. But I'm here. I've always been here. I just wish someone would look at me, really look, and say, "You don't have to give anymore. We see you, just as you are." Because I'm tired of being the shadow in the room I built. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind that felt too quiet, too hollow. They had come over, not all of them, just two, and we sat around the kitchen table, each of us in our usual places. I made tea. I always make tea. It's my way of filling the silences they don't seem to hear anymore. We were talking about something small, insurance maybe, or their commute, when one of them made a joke. I don't even remember what it was, but something about the way they laughed, the way they rolled their eyes, like I didn't understand, like I was some fragile relic from another era. Something in me cracked. I didn't mean to cry. I never do. But I felt it rising before I could stop it, that slow burning swell in my chest that no amount of swallowing could hold back. My eyes filled, my voice caught. I put my teacup down and folded my hands in my lap like I was bracing for impact. I feel so alone, I said. It came out quiet, like a confession, like a secret I hadn't even admitted to myself. They went still. I thought maybe one of them would reach across the table. Maybe they'd ask me why. Maybe they'd come around to my side and put their arms around my shoulders like I used to do when they came home crying from school. Instead, they looked at each other. Then one of them laughed soft and awkward. "Mom, you're just in a mood. You've always been dramatic." The other took a sip of tea, didn't meet my eyes, said something about maybe needing to get outside more, maybe volunteering, maybe calling a friend. They talked like I wasn't still crying. And just like that, I wished I hadn't said anything. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, the old one with the stretched cuffs, and the faint scent of lavender. I nodded. Made a small joke to cover the moment. Something about hormones or being silly. I laughed at myself to make them comfortable, because nothing makes people more uneasy than an older woman being vulnerable, especially when it's their own mother. They finished their tea quickly after that. They hugged me goodbye, brief and distracted already, reaching for their keys. I smiled. Of course I smiled. I said, "Drive safe." I said, "Thanks for coming." I said, "It was nice to see you." They were gone 5 minutes later. The house was too quiet after they left. I sat back at the table and looked at the 2 teacups they'd left behind, both still half full. The spoon in mine had stopped moving. The light outside had turned gold, filtering through the window like a slow apology. That was the only time I ever showed them my sadness, without wrapping it in a lesson, a joke, or a soft distraction. And it was the last. After that day, I built myself up stronger, sharper. I found ways to turn every ache into silence, every tear into breath, because if even my own children couldn't face my pain, the real wordless kind, then what was the point in speaking it? There's something deeply lonely about having to make other people comfortable with your grief. I became a quiet place again, the place they could return to without ever asking what it cost me to keep smiling. But sometimes late at night I remember the look in their eyes, not cruelty, not malice, just discomfort. They didn't know what to do with me. They didn't recognize the woman who cried at the kitchen table. And because they didn't recognize her, they looked away, as if sadness had made me a stranger, as if love only has room for strength, not sorrow. It didn't used to be empty. It was once the seat of a husband, then the favorite spot of a daughter who liked the way the sun hit her back in the morning. Later, a son who dragged the chair slightly to the side, always sitting at an angle, legs bouncing beneath the table. For years that chair was lived in, laughed in. It held elbows, secret-sharing, sleepy yawns over cereal bowls. Now it just sits there. I still pull it out when I set the table, out of habit maybe, or hope. There's something in me that can't bear to clear it away completely, as if doing so would make the absence too official, as if it would mean I'm ready to stop waiting. I'm not ready. I still cook more than I need. I still pour 2 cups of coffee. I still catch myself saying we when I mean me. Old instincts die slow. It's strange, really, how much a piece of furniture can hold. That chair has heard more confessions than most churches. It has held anger, forgiveness, laughter, silence. And now, dust, quiet, emptiness that doesn't announce itself, but lingers like perfume after someone has left. They don't sit in that chair anymore, not even when they visit. They take other seats now, new places, like they're avoiding something they don't quite understand. Or maybe they feel it too, the ghost of all that was once there. I used to think someone would ask, "Why do you always set that place?" Or maybe just move it closer and sit beside me without ceremony. But no one does. Once my granddaughter came over for lunch. She sat across from me and scrolled through her phone between bites of spaghetti. I smiled at her, trying not to mind the silence between us, trying to convince myself that her presence was enough. At one point she looked up and said, "Why do you set so many places?" I blinked. "Oh, I don't know," I said. "Habit." She nodded and went back to her phone. She didn't notice the sadness in my voice. Or maybe she did and didn't know what to do with it. I cleared the plates after she left, washed them carefully, stacked them with precision, the way I always do. Then I walked past that empty chair. I didn't touch it, but I looked at it for a long time. And in that moment I saw myself. Not the woman they visit now and then, but the woman who stayed through every slammed door, every missed call, every birthday they forgot, every Mother's Day card that never arrived. I stayed even when they grew into people who stopped needing me or thought they did. That chair holds the version of me that once mattered. The one who made peanut butter sandwiches cut diagonally. The one who stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. The one who listened to stories that had no endings, just wide-eyed beginnings, told between spoonfuls of soup. Now I eat alone. And I still set her place. Not because I expect anyone to fill it, but because somewhere in me I need to believe she's still here. Still part of the table. Still worthy of being seen. I don't think they mean to leave me out. I don't think they even notice. That's the worst part. It's not cruelty that leaves a person behind. It's inattention. And that kind of forgetting hurts more than anything. It was on the calendar. I know because I wrote it there myself in small blue ink, the same way I've always marked appointments, grocery days, and reminders to water the plants. I even circled the date, not because I expected a grand celebration, but because part of me still wanted to believe someone else might notice. But the day came like any other, quiet, soft around the edges. Morning light crept through the window, dusted the floor in gold. I got up slowly, joint stiff, heart heavier than usual. I didn't check my phone first thing. I told myself I wouldn't need to, that if they remembered they'd call. They'd show up. They'd know. I made myself toast, sliced a pear that had gone a bit too soft, and brewed tea the way I like it, not because someone else might prepare it for me, but because I knew no one would. I waited, not with desperation, not like a child counting the hours, but with a quiet, painful stillness. No calls. Midday came. The sun sat high and proud, and I sat on the porch with my sweater wrapped tight around my shoulders, pretending the breeze wasn't as cold as it felt. A neighbor walked by, waved. I smiled back. She didn't know it was my birthday. Why would she? I went inside and checked the mail. Junk, coupons, an electricity bill. I stood at the kitchen counter, fingers tracing the edge of a drawer, and tried to remember the last time someone made me a birthday card by hand. I could still feel the thick construction paper, the clumsy handwriting, the glitter that never quite stayed glued down. I used to save them in a drawer near my bed, little treasures from a time when their love was louder, messier, more obvious. Now their love, if it exists, is quiet. Too quiet to reach me. By evening I lit a single candle, not on a cake, I didn't bake one this year, but in a small dish by the sink. A little flame just for me. I whispered happy birthday into the silence and closed my eyes. I didn't make a wish. What would I even wish for time to rewind, for the version of them that used to bring me wildflowers in clenched little fists, for a voice on the phone saying I didn't forget? It's not about gifts. It never was. It's about being held in someone's mind, being remembered without needing to prompt, to remind, to hint. It's about someone saying you matter today, especially. The next day, my daughter called, casual, routine. She didn't mention the date. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want the apology, the guilt, the hurried, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I meant to, followed by a distracted promise to make it up to me. Because some things can't be made up, not really. So I let it slide. And she hung up thinking everything was fine. But that night when I got into bed, I felt something inside me shift. Not anger, not quite. More like surrender. A quiet folding inward. A decision that I would stop hoping for things that clearly no longer belonged to me. I would stop expecting to be cherished the way I once was. I would stop waiting at the window, heart, perched like a bird scanning the horizon for signs of care. I turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling, that soft blue-gray wash of shadows. And I told myself out loud, they don't know what they've forgotten. And maybe that's the saddest part of all. It wasn't a grand decision, no dramatic declaration or teary vow, just a quiet choice made in the space between messages that went unanswered and calls that were always returned later. I simply stopped being the one to reach out, the one who initiated, who checked in, who sent the first "just thinking of you" text. And the silence that followed was louder than I ever imagined. Days passed, then a week, then 2. My phone sat face down on the kitchen counter like a sealed promise nothing would come. No unexpected buzz, no voicemail chime, no accidental calls or forgotten reminders. The silence stretched. Its legs made itself at home, and I listened to it. At first I thought they must be busy, caught up in work, the children life. I made excuses for them the same way I always had. They're tired. They'll call tomorrow. Something must have come up. But the truth came slowly like fog rolling in over an old field they weren't calling because they didn't think to. Because somewhere along the way I had taught them they didn't need to. I had always been the glue, the check-in, the reminder, the bridge between holidays and obligations. When they missed each other, I kept them connected. When they missed me, I made sure they didn't have to feel it too deeply. I made it easy, comfortable, effortless. And now, without my voice reaching across the silence, there was just emptiness. It wasn't just about phones and texts. It was everything. I stopped suggesting lunch, stopped reminding them of birthdays, appointments, anniversaries. I stopped sending recipes I thought they might like. I stopped filling in the silence with myself. And no one noticed. No one said I haven't heard from you in a while. No one asked if I was okay. The world simply kept turning, and I slipped further into its shadow. I remember sitting by the window one evening, watching the sky fade from pink to deep blue, wondering if I could disappear completely, and who would feel it first. The postman, the grocery clerk who rings up my tea and apples, the neighbor who sometimes waves. It's strange how you can love people with everything you have and still feel like a placeholder in their lives, a warm voice they used to call a comfort they no longer reach for. But something changed in me. The silence wasn't just painful, it was revealing. It showed me the shape of my life without my effort holding it together. It showed me who leaned in when I stepped back. And no one did. And still I didn't break. There's a kind of strength that lives in silence. Not the silence of being ignored, but the silence you choose. The kind where you stop throwing your love out like rope, hoping someone will grab hold. You stop asking to be seen. You start sitting with yourself as you are without apology. I thought not reaching out would feel like abandonment, but instead it felt like breathing, like dropping a heavy bag I'd carried too long. That's not to say it didn't hurt. It hurt every time I heard laughter from a phone call that wasn't mine. Every time I saw photos posted online of gatherings I wasn't invited to, smiles I didn't help create. Every time a message I never sent haunted my fingertips. But I held the silence anyway. Because for once I wanted to know what it felt like to be missed, to be remembered without prompting, to be chosen, not chased. And in all that silence I learned something painful but freeing. They may not reach out. They may not notice. But I am still here. I still matter. Even if I'm the only one who remembers how deeply I've loved. Even if I'm the only one left who understands the cost of staying quiet. It wasn't an anniversary. It wasn't a holiday. It wasn't any kind of special day. Just a plain Tuesday gray and soft with rain tapping the windows like someone too shy to knock. I had been folding towels, the same ones I'd folded 100 times, when something inside me gave way. A corner, a seam. I didn't feel it at first, just a tightness in my throat, a prickle behind my eyes. And then I looked up. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, not just a glance, but a full, quiet seeing, the way my shoulders curved now, the soft sag in my cheeks, the tiredness that lived behind my eyes, not from lack of sleep, but from too many days spent pretending. And I whispered, "I miss me." That was it. And the tears came. Not loud, not desperate, just real. Slow, steady rivers that had been dammed up for years. I didn't wipe them away. I didn't rush to compose myself. I let them fall. Let my face crumple. Let my body shake in that small, hidden way that no one ever sees when they think you're strong. I slid down to the bathroom floor, back against the wall, my hands resting limp in my lap. I cried for the woman I used to be, the one who danced in the kitchen while dinner simmered, who wore earrings just because they jingled, who used to laugh so hard her ribs hurt. I cried for the things I gave up, not just sleep or money, but pieces of my own self I handed away too willingly. My silence, my softness, my wants. I cried for the words I never said, for the help I never asked for the birthdays spent alone, for the empty chair. I cried because I thought they'd see me eventually. I thought all my giving would wrap back around one day and bring me home again. But it didn't. And in that moment, on that cold bathroom floor, I stopped pretending that was ever going to happen. And I didn't feel angry. I felt clean. Like every tear was washing away the old stories I kept telling myself, that they'd come around, that I just needed to hold on a little longer, that if I stayed quiet enough, good enough, selfless enough, they'd remember. They didn't remember. But I did. I remembered all of it. Every bruise I hid every night. I waited for a call that never came. Every candle I lit for myself, every meal eaten in silence. I remembered the way I always turned back when they walked away, just in case they glanced over their shoulder. They never did. But I don't regret loving them. Even now in this softness, I don't regret a single diaper changed, fever soothed, or nights spent awake while they slept. That love was real. It was mine. But so is this grief, this quiet ache that I finally let come up for air. I stayed on that floor for a long time. Not because I was broken, because I was releasing. Releasing the version of me who thought tears were weakness, releasing the idea that strength meant silence, releasing the hope that if I kept holding on they'd look me in the eyes, and see the woman behind the apron, behind the advice, behind the "I'm fine." I finally saw her, and she was beautiful in her undoing. The rain never stopped that day. It tapped gently on the roof as I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling. Everything in the house felt still, not lonely, not empty, just still. The kind of stillness that arrives after a storm has passed, when all you can hear is your own breathing and the soft hum of being alive. I didn't reach for my phone. I didn't check the door. I didn't imagine them arriving, apologizing, wrapping me in the kind of love I had always hoped for. Instead, I sat with myself, with my quiet, my tired hands, my aging eyes, my dignified outlook. I brewed a cup of tea, not for anyone else, but for me. I wrapped myself in a blanket and didn't wait for anyone to sit beside me. And for once, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel forgotten, because in the silence they left behind, I finally heard my own voice again, soft, weathered, wise, and she said, "You don't need to be loud. You don't need to be seen. You just need to remember that you are still here, and you are still yours." So I let the quiet hold me, not like an absence, but like an answer. And in that stillness, I found something I didn't expect to find. Peace. Not the peace that comes from being loved the way you wish, but the peace that comes from loving yourself enough to stop waiting. I gave them silence, and in it I found myself,